was diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia, or AML, which is an aggressive blood cancer.
It wasn't supposed to end this way. When you look at the American history books, the Kennedy family narrative is usually defined by sudden, violent interruptions, gunshots in Dallas, a hotel kitchen in Los Angeles, a plane crashing into the dark Atlantic. We have been conditioned to expect the tragedies of this dynasty to be loud, public, and instantaneous. But on a quiet morning in November, specifically the anniversary of her grandfather's assassination, Tatiana Schlossberg changed that narrative forever. She didn't release a press statement through a spokesperson. She didn't have a family representative stand at a podium. She published an essay, and in that essay, the quietest member of America's most famous family revealed that she is fighting a battle that no amount of money, connections, or historical significance can win. She is 35 years old. She has a newborn baby in her arms, and she has been given less than a year to live. This isn't just a story about cancer. If it were, it would be tragic enough. But as you peel back the layers of Tatiana's revelation, you find something far more unsettling. You find a medical mystery that baffled the world's best oncologists. You find a connection to the aftermath of September 11th that raises terrifying questions for an entire generation of New Yorkers. And perhaps most shocking of all, you find a bitter, public accusation of betrayal directed at her own blood, a direct line drawn between her dying days and the political decisions of her cousin, the Secretary of Health and Human Services. This is the story of the day the good Kennedy broke her silence, and the devastating secrets she spilled on her way out. To understand the sheer cruelty of this situation, you have to go back to May of 2024. Picture the scene. It is arguably the highest peak of human experience. Tatiana is in the delivery room. She has just given birth to her second child, a beautiful, healthy baby girl. Her husband, George, is there. Her mother, Caroline, is there. The room is filled with that exhausted, euphoric relief that comes when a baby cries for the first time. Everything went perfectly. The delivery was smooth. The baby is safe. For a few hours, life is perfect. Then, a nurse walks in. She isn't smiling. She's holding a printout of a routine blood test. Now, for context, a normal white blood cell count for a healthy adult usually sits somewhere between 4,000 and 11,000. That is the standard range. The nurse looks at Tatiana, then at the doctor, and the air in the room shifts from celebration to emergency. Tatiana's count wasn't slightly elevated. It wasn't 20,000. It wasn't even 50,000. The number on the page was 131,000. In the medical world, that is not a warning sign. That is a siren screaming at full volume. In the span of 10 minutes, Tatiana Schlossberg went from a mother planning her trip home to a patient being rushed into isolation. The diagnosis was acute myeloid leukemia, or AML. But as she would soon find out, this wasn't just leukemia. It was something much rarer and much darker. The psychological horror of this moment is hard to overstate. Just 24 hours prior, Tatiana had swum a full mile in a lap pool. She was 9 months pregnant, active, and felt, in her own words, like the healthiest person she knew. There was no fatigue, no bruising, no night sweats. The cancer had been raging through her marrow, multiplying her white blood cells by the tens of thousands, and her body had given her zero indication that she was dying. It is a terrifying realization that the body can mask its own destruction so effectively. She wrote that when the doctors first said the word leukemia, she instinctively looked over her shoulder, assuming they had mixed up the charts. It simply could not be her. She was the environmental reporter. She was the one who followed the rules. She was the Kennedy who stayed out of the spotlight. But the blood doesn't care about your last name, and it doesn't care about your lifestyle. As the initial shock wore off, the medical team at Columbia Presbyterian began to dig deeper into her genetics, looking for a target they could hit with What they found instead was a ghost in the machine. They identified a specific genetic mutation known as Inversion 3. When the oncologists saw this, their faces dropped. Inversion 3 is incredibly rare, but when it does appear, it is almost exclusively found in geriatric patients, people in their 70s or 80s, whose DNA has degraded over decades of life. To find this specific breakdown in a vibrant 35-year-old woman was a medical anomaly. This mutation changes everything. Standard leukemia responds to standard chemotherapy. You poison the bad cells, they die. You recover. But Inversion 3 acts like a shield. It tells the cancer cells to ignore the poison. It makes the tumor smarter, more resilient, and infinitely harder to kill. The moment that mutation was identified, the conversation in that hospital room quietly shifted from curative to management. They weren't fighting to save her life anymore. They were fighting to extend it. And while the doctors scrambled for a protocol, they started asking questions that point to a much larger societal fear. Every specialist who walked into her room asked the same question. Were you at ground zero? Did you spend time in Lower Manhattan in late 2001? Tatiana was in 6th grade when the Twin Towers fell. She wasn't a first responder. She wasn't digging through the pile. She was just a child going to school in a city covered in dust. But the specific signature of her cancer, this aggressive mutation-driven leukemias, showing up with alarming frequency in the survivors of that era. Even though she told them she hadn't visited the site until years later, the question lingered. It suggests that the environmental impact of that day is still claiming victims more than 2 decades later, picking them off at random. For a woman who dedicated her professional life to climate journalism and environmental truth, the irony is sickening. The environment she tried to protect might be the very thing that triggered the glitch. In her DNA, while Tatiana was grappling with the why, her husband, George Moran, was grappling with the how. We often talk about the spouses of cancer patients as silent supporters, but George's role in this story is heroic in a way that breaks your heart. George is a doctor himself, a urologist. This means he couldn't hide behind the comforting vagueness of medical optimism. When the doctors spoke in codes and percentages, George knew exactly what they meant. He knew what Inversion 3 implied before anyone else in the family fully grasped it. He didn't just sit by her bedside. He moved into the hospital. For 5 weeks, while Tatiana underwent an induction chemotherapy that stripped the lining of her throat and left her unable to swallow, George slept on the hard linoleum floor of the hospital room. He became the gatekeeper. He took the calls. He translated the horror into palatable sentences for the rest of the family. He held their newborn daughter, feeding her from a bottle, while his wife withered away in the bed next to him. It is a testament to love, yes, but also a glimpse into the trauma that caregivers endure watching the person you love disintegrate, while you have to remain the anchor. Then there is the guilt. You would think a woman facing death would be entitled to be angry, to be selfish, to scream at the universe. But Tatiana is a Kennedy, and specifically, she is Carolyn Kennedy's daughter. Carolyn is the last surviving member of her immediate family. She watched her father die. She watched her uncle Bobby die. She watched her brother John Jr. and her sister-in-law Carolyn Bissett die. Tatiana grew up with an acute awareness of this shadow. In her essay, she admits to a good daughter complex. She spent her entire life trying to be safe, trying to be reliable, trying to be the one thing in Caroline's life that wouldn't break. She viewed herself as the antidote to the family curse. Now, facing this diagnosis, her overwhelming emotion wasn't fear for herself, it was guilt for her mother. She felt like she had failed in her primary mission. By getting sick, by becoming a tragedy, she felt she was re-traumatizing her mother, adding one more gravestone to a collection that is already too full. She wrote about the pain of seeing her mother's face in the hospital, a face that has become a stoic mask of grief over 60 years. It's a heavy psychological burden. The idea that your own death is an inconvenience or a sorrow you are inflicting on someone else, it adds a layer of complexity to the tragedy that is unique to this specific family. Desperation breeds invention. And when the chemo failed to clear the Inversion 3 cells, the doctors turned to the last line of defense, a bone marrow transplant. This is a brutal procedure. They essentially have to kill your entire immune system, wipe it clean, like a hard drive, and then replace it with someone else's, hoping the new cells will recognize the cancer and attack it. They needed a match, and they found one in the family. Tatiana's older sister, Rose Schlossberg, was a perfect genetic match. Rose didn't hesitate. In a moment of profound sisterly solidarity, Rose went under the needle to extract her own marrow to save Tatiana. It felt, for a brief shimmering moment, like a turning point. It felt like a movie script. The sisters, united by blood, fighting off the darkness. The transplant went ahead. Tatiana spent weeks in isolation, her body defenseless, waiting for Rose's cells to engraft and start working. And they did. Initially, her counts went up. There was hope. There was talk of going home, of raising her children, of putting this nightmare in the rearview mirror. But biology is cruel and cancer is relentless. The Inversion 3 mutation found a way around Rose's cells. It adapted, it surged back. The relapse was faster and more violent than the initial onset. This is where the story turns from a medical tragedy into a political firestorm. In her final months, Tatiana didn't just write a memoir, she wrote an indictment. We are living in a timeline where her cousin, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., has ascended to the position of Secretary of Health and Human Services. For decades, the Kennedy family has kept their disagreements private. adhering to a code of public unity. Tatiana shattered that code. In her writing, she unleashed a fury that can only come from someone who has nothing left to lose. She isn't just mad at cancer, she is mad at the system that gave up on finding a cure. She specifically targets the recent budget cuts to the National Institutes of Health. She points to the slashing of funding for mRNA research. We all know Mr. NA from the COVID vaccines. But what the general public often misses is that this technology was on the verge of a breakthrough for cancer vaccines. Scientists were close to programming the body to hunt down specific mutations like Inversion 3. But that research requires massive, sustained federal funding. Tatiana wrote with searing clarity. I watched as Bobby cut nearly $500 million for research. She draws a direct, undeniable line between her cousin's skepticism of modern medical science and her own prognosis. She believes, with the clarity of the dying, that if that funding had been maintained, if the government had doubled down on science instead of retreating into skepticism, there might have been a trial ready for her. There might have been a vaccine for Inversion 3. She feels betrayed not just by the government, but by her own blood. It's a modern Greek tragedy. The man in charge of the nation's health is the cousin of the woman dying from the very disease he defunded research for. It is a controversy that will likely stay in the legacy of the current administration and tear the Kennedy family apart even further. After the failure of the transplant and the realization that the political landscape offered no help, Tatiana tried one last Hail Mary. She enrolled in a clinical trial for CAR T-cell therapy. This is the stuff of science fiction, taking T-cells, engineering them in a lab to become super soldiers, and injecting them back into the body. It's the cutting edge. But clinical trials are not treatments. They are experiments. You are a guinea pig. You are data. Tatiana describes the roller coaster of the trial, the initial burst of optimism when the engineered cells entered her system, followed by the crushing disappointment as her cancer outsmarted them yet again. The side effects were horrific. Neurological issues, fevers, the feeling of her body turning against itself. And then came the conversation, the one every cancer patient fears more than death itself. The doctor sat down, the charts were put away, there were no more trials to pitch, no more what-ifs. The doctor looked Tatiana in the eye and told her that they had run out of road. With aggressive management, with blood transfusions and palliative chemo. He told her he could keep her alive for a year, maybe. That word, maybe. It hangs in the air like a guillotine blade. It signifies the end of the battle for a cure and the beginning of the battle for time. It shifted her entire reality. She wasn't trying to get better anymore to go back to work or to run a marathon. She was trying to stay alive long enough for her daughter to form a memory. This brings us to the most gut-wrenching part of her reality today. How do you parent a child who won't remember you? Tatiana is currently navigating the impossible task of being a mother to a toddler son, Edwin, and a 1-year-old daughter, knowing she won't be there for their first days of school. She won't be there for graduations. She won't be there for heartbreaks. She has begun the frantic, heartbreaking process of archiving her life. She is writing letters for birthdays she will miss. She is recording videos, trying to capture her voice, her laugh, her advice, hoping to imprint her personality onto a digital ghost that her children can visit when they are older. She wrote about the crushing realization that her daughter will likely only know her as a face in a frame on the mantelpiece, a name mentioned by relatives in hushed tones. Your mother loved you. Your mother was so smart. But she won't be real. She will be a myth, a legend, another Kennedy tragedy. Tatiana is racing against her own biology to leave a legacy of love that is strong enough to bridge the gap between the living and the dead. She is trying to parent from the grave before she is even in it. The physical toll this has taken on her is shocking. The woman who was once a vibrant presence in the New York social scene, a sharp-witted journalist, has been physically dismantled. She describes looking in the mirror and seeing her arms whittled into bone. She talks about having to relearn how to walk after weeks of atrophy in a hospital bed. The isolation of the cancer ward meant she couldn't hug her son for weeks at a time because his preschool germs could kill her instantly. It is a lonely, visceral disintegration. But despite the grim prognosis, despite the physical collapse, and despite the political anger, Tatiana's final message is not one of defeat. It is an assertion of existence. By publishing this essay, she took control of the narrative. She refused to let her death be a tabloid mystery. She refused to let the paparazzi speculate about why she looked thin or why she hadn't been seen at galas. She put it all on the table. She highlighted the fragility of life. Yes, but she also used her dying breath to advocate for the importance of scientific research and healthcare access. She is warning us. She is telling us that the systems we take for granted are fragile, that the environment we ignore is toxic, that the science we underfund is our only lifeline. As she faces her final months, she is doing exactly what her grandfather, John F. Kennedy, urged a nation to do. She is thinking of others. She is asking not what the world can do for her because it is too late for that, but what her story can do for the world. She is facing the dark with a stoic, heartbreaking bravery that reminds us why this family has held our attention for a century. The Kennedy curse is often spoken about in supernatural terms, as if some dark cloud follows them. But Tatiana's story grounds it in reality. The curse is public service mixed with private pain. The curse is the immense pressure to be good, to be strong, to be perfect, even when your cells are mutated. The curse is having your personal tragedy played out on a global stage. Tatiana Schlossberg is the latest chapter in this saga, but she is writing her own ending. It is a tragic ending, an unfair ending, but it is her ending. And in sharing it, she has ensured that while her children may not remember her presence, they will certainly know her power. This is a woman who looked death in the eye and decided to speak. And the world is listening,